that means nothing. Or it's going to say that the windows have to, this window has to be replaced, or, you know, there's a hole in the ceiling, you know, a leak, a roof, you know, that looks like the shingles. If the shingles on the roof look like less than 2 years of life, they're going to ask for a roofer to validate there's at least 2 years left on that. I think it's 2. I'll look up that guideline. It used to be 2. So that's the key. If the appraiser calls for it, the seller has to do it before closing, or you cannot close.
And the buyer cannot do that?
Well, let's talk about that scenario, how that could work. So now you've got a buyer engaged going, hey, I want the house. And the seller's like, I'm not paying anything to closing. What we've done to protect both parties is said that the earnest money has been now, and we wait till title's done, everything's clear. The buyer puts the earnest money up for that repair. So the seller, in fact, does the repair. It's their house. And again, you're going back and forth now on who's going to pick the vendor on the house.
Mm-hmm.
You know, who's going to do this? Who's going to be responsible for this? Because the buyer doesn't own the house yet. So you have to be very careful with that. There are some very few things that can be done after closing in escrow repair, and we'll get that updated list and send that out to you, but it's very, very limited. You can't get a roof repaired. There can't be anything going on in the house like a gas leak or, you know, something that's hazardous and done after closing. But again, the earnest money could be put up. You know, the buyer, let's say they put 3,000 up and the repair is going to be 2,000. The amendment could state that the repair is going to be done by the seller, by so-and-so vendor, very specific on the repairs. If the buyer doesn't close, that earnest money is refundable to the seller to cover that cost. You know, it's something that we have written up and the buyer has paid for it.
Anybody have any questions? Because I still have more, but I'd like for you to ask the questions first.
Can I ask
Okay.
about the mandatory clause? Sorry.
Yep. So Donna and then Markia, Donna and then Markia. I think that's the
I was just asking if Kathy could talk about the mandatory clause, how that works.
In what sense?
Talk about the appraisal. If it doesn't appraise, can the buyer get their earnest money back at any point if it doesn't appraise?
If you look at FHA, it's very specific and you've got to go by the financing contingency. Can someone pull that up so we can read it? Because I don't know it by memory.
I have it up.
Thanks, Ryan.
The mandatory clause. So
Yep.
we're talking about.
Yep.
It says that it is expressly agreed that notwithstanding any other provisions of this agreement, buyer shall not be obligated to complete the purchase of the property described here or incur penalty by forfeiture of earnest money deposits by otherwise unless the buyer has been given in accordance with the HUD FHA requirements, a written statement by the Federal Housing Commissioner or a direct endorsement letter setting forth the appraised value of the property of not less than blank.
That's your key. You put an offer in and that amount's going to match your offer. Okay. What we've seen is the buyer's agent not go back once it's negotiated. So let's say that you start off at a certain price, but that price escalates up through the process. You've got to go back and get everybody to sign and have the amount of the final sales price in that to protect your buyer. Because if you start with a low sales price, you leave that in there, you're only protecting them with what that sales price says.
Did everybody hear that? That's like a FHA advanced that
Yeah.
will separate us from other agents who don't know that.
So you're putting that in and it matches your offer price, right? You go through negotiations, that price escalates up. You have to have a final amendatory clause with the sales price, protect your buyer to match the final sales price. Those numbers have to match, or you have not protected your buyer at that sales price.
That's powerful. Thank you for
And we
that.
see it all the time. We
Yeah,
see
sure.
it where it's never amended, and then the appraisal comes in low, and it's like, well, everybody knew. No, it's a contract. It has to say it.
So,
if-
so
ahead,
that
Donna.
means if they don't have the difference between what that actual final sale price is and what's protected under this amendatory clause, that means they have to come up with that difference.
Right, or they forfeited their earnest money and they don't buy the house.
So what that means, everybody, is that when you're doing your contract checklist, as part of the due diligence, I would put something that says review FHA loan contingency exhibit. And make sure, and I would highlight that particular thing, and I would say amendatory clause, review amendatory clause, so that when the appraisal comes back, you've got that on your checklist so you don't forget that. And I'll add it to our checklist and send it out as well.
So you've negotiated the contract, the price has now been completed. Immediately, everybody has to sign that amendatory clause to that new price. So important.
Yeah.
So
So
we
Marquia,
would just do another financing contingency, or how would we?
You would just fill out another amendatory clause with that new sales price for everybody to execute.
Okay,
I've
so we
even-
could
I've seen-
copy copy that clause into an amendment form.
No, no,
How does
you need that full document in its entirety. A lender's going to make you do it in full. They will not just take a capture of that. That entire finance contingency will need to be done with that price.
Okay, and then that would just be the next exhibit number or letter.
It's going to replace the one that you had originally.
Okay.
and for those of you who are brand new and might be going, what? There are different, when we write a purchase and sale, if there's an all cash offer exhibit, there's an FHA loan exhibit, there's a conventional loan exhibit. There are typically different pieces of paper that have different wording on them that we attach depending on what type of loan your buyer is getting. So when we're talking about FHA today, it's a specific exhibit that you can find in DocuSign. And if you have any questions about it, just reach out. I'll be glad to help you.
Well, and as you go over it, and Alec and I and Tammy say this all the time, even if it's not ours, and let's say you're writing this up on a night or a weekend or even during the day, reach out. We'll help you walk through it. We'll help you walk through it, because you got to know, what's the MIP? Are they financing it in? There are a number of other areas on that FHA exhibit that you've got to know what the answers are to fill out.
Yep. Marquia, did you have a question?
It was actually going to be in regards to the mortgage insurance premium that she just referred to. And just knowing, like, can you look at the approval letter and see if the mortgage insurance premium is going to be included in the financing, or is it something that's going to be paid upfront? Like if we are putting in an offer over the weekend, is there something we definitely would have to call the lender for to get the information for?
Yeah, it's not on the pre-approval letter, but 99.9% of the time it's going to be financed in, and it's always 1.75%. So if you can't reach your lender, you're not going to jeopardize the contract by saying anything different on that. You could just go ahead and put the 1.75 in financed in.
And for our brand new agents, can you tell them what MIP is?
MIP is the government default insurance. So it's called MIP, Mortgage Insurance Premium, and FHA. It's called PMI if you're doing a conventional loan. And all that does is protect the lender, the servicer, upon default. So all this money monthly and upfront, because there's a portion that's financed in that we just talked about, is going into FHA's bucket to protect them. Foreclosures start happening, the first thing they do is the government insurance actually protects the servicer and makes up the difference. So again, it's a government insurance, it's monthly, it's actually financed in also on FHA, It's protecting the lender upon that person going into foreclosure. And it's mandatory in FHA and it's not refundable. It never comes off. Used to come off after a certain period of time, like conventional loan, but now it's on there for the life of the loan.
Really? And that's something that your buyer pays for. And it's like Kathy said, most of the time it is financed into their mortgage. How much does that affect their mortgage premium, if it does at all, Kathy?
Well, your financing up front is minimal. I mean, you're talking, depending on the loan amount, 3,000 to 5,000 financed in, that's, maybe, $10 a month. But then the private mortgage monthly depends on their credit score and what actually calculates in. I mean, it can be, $150, $120. It's pretty high, but FHA is typically a lower rate. So sometimes we'll do that comparison of what does it look like with a conventional loan if they qualify for 3% down versus FHA 3.5%. And we look at their credit score and we look at what it actually calculates. So there's a comparison that needs to be done. FHA is not always the perfect loan. We always try to give the conventional option we can. And as a lot of you, senior people, Pam will tell you, Donna will tell you, most listing agents want to see a conventional offer versus an FHA.
So that leads me to my next question. What are the benefits for somebody doing an FHA? Why would they choose that?
Having those incidences, that's, the foreclosure, the bankruptcy, that they don't have enough seasoning for conventional. We have to have a 620 mid credit score for conventional. So if they don't have that 620 score, we do rescores. So when people come in, let's say they have that low score, we have a internal company that does an algorithm testing on their scores and says, if they pay this credit card down, if they can get this collection off, if this was an error, we can get them up. If we can't get them up to a 620, they can't do a conventional loan.
Mm-hmm. So it really doesn't have to do with the 3% down payment?
Sometimes it does. 3% is for most people that are first-time home buyers. And if they have a lower income, even second home buyers, a 5% typically on conventional. So again, we're looking at, do they have the money? Do they have the cash? That might dictate the FHA, are they a first-time home buyer or not? And what is their credit score and what things have happened on their credit? And we have to look at all of those, and debt to income ratio. A conventional loan will never take that high debt to income ratio that we talked about. I mean, we're usually looking at a 40 something percent, 47, 43 to 49, depending on the credit score on conventional. So if their debt load's a little bit heavier, that might push them into FHA. I mean, we've had people buying $1 million home that had to go FHA because of their credit. So it's not just the low sales price homes, it's what criteria, underwriting criteria, has to match with this person. How can we get them a house now? What loan's going to fit? What loans, because we want to look at every option for them, will fit them now.
Anybody else have any questions? So
I just want to verify one thing,
Go ahead.
Candace.
Yeah.
I
Yep,
just went
please.
through the similar situation with the FHA loan contingency. And I redid the FHA loan contingency because my lender sent over something that needs to be adjusted. But however, I still did have to do an amendment. Oh,
You're
can you hear me
breaking up,
now?
Marquita. You're breaking up a little bit.
Okay. Can you hear me better now?
Much better.
Okay. Now I was saying that I still had to do pretty much like an amendment to agree that we were changing the FHA contingency. I just couldn't change it and, just have it reinitial.
So that you're saying that they made you do a new one?
Well, yes, I still had to do a new one, but I still had to make an amendment to agree that we were changing the FHA contingency before it was signed by all parties.
Right. So what you had to do is go back because it didn't get done at the final contract process. because really the best scenario, and Candace, you can relate to them on how to do it the best way. I would think if you've agreed to a final price, when those documents go over back for the seller and the buyer's final signatures, that's when that amendment needs to be changed and be attached to that final contract. But if it hasn't been, then I guess you're saying, as the lender said, you have to do an amendment stating that all parties agree, and that
Well,
amendment.
actually, it was the agent. It was the agent that actually asked for it. So the lender just pretty much wrote back, and like I put 97%, but it was 96.5. So it was some numbers that were off on the actual
Oh, gotcha.
original contract. And
Gotcha.
so he, sent it back and was like, hey, it's actually 96.5. We actually have a second mortgage. It was a couple of things that I didn't know prior to doing the contract that I had to redo the FHA contingency. When I sent it over to the other agent, he was just like, hey, can we get an amendment pretty much to agree to the changes prior to signing the new FHA contingency?
That's a contract question, Candace. I would think so you're the buyer's agent or listing agent?
Buyer's agent.
Yeah. So the listing
Yes.
agent was asking you to write up the amendment that all parties of what you wanted to amend, that all parties agreed.
So,
Right, the
so
other
Pam,
agent, the
I'm going to
listing
rely
agent
on.
pretty much asked me.
Yeah, I'm gonna let Pam speak to that. In my opinion, when everyone signs a new document, it implies that everyone is agreed. And so I think that's an
Okay.
extra step that might not be necessary. But Pam, what do you think? You're on here. I
Yeah,
think.
no, I agree with you, Candace, that if everyone signed the new document, that, that we don't have to
Right.
write an
You
amendment.
shouldn't
for
have
any
to put
other-
an amendment.
Yeah, we don't have to write an amendment for anything else that we've changed like that,
Yeah, it's either they agree to it or
Okay.
not, is my opinion. But again, I'm not a realtor, so some of those things I'll push
I
you
would
to get.
not
Okay.
argue.
Yeah, no, it
I
was the
would
other
not argue
agent.
with-
It was the other agent that asked, so maybe he just didn't know. I did it just because I was like, maybe I missed a step, but I thought that we all agreed on.
I mean,
No,
there's
you
no
did-
harm in doing it.
You did fine. I would not get into an argument with the other agent over something so minor. I would just go ahead and do it, to be honest,
Right.
but I would know it's not necessary and you're just doing it this one time and hopefully the next time you get an agent that's a little more informed or less
Okay.
nervous. So, yeah. Any other questions? Any ahas? I have one. I did not know that you have to change the price in the amendatory clause. That was a new one for me today. So I appreciate that. That was like the $10,000. I mean, just think about if you didn't do that and you didn't know to do that and you got in that situation and your buyer's looking at you like, why isn't my earnest money protected? And it's because you didn't know. We all know that now. That is huge.
Good.
Yeah, thank you for that. Anybody, and I know we've got new
Hey,
people on here.
I've got an aha.
If you've got a question, oh, good.
My aha is I don't know shit about loans. So if you've got that, you said you had some kind of flyer or something that talks about each and every one and things. I would love to have a copy of that.
Yeah, we've got a comparison for FHA being conventional. We've got 3 or 4 flyers that we can send you guys today. And then Alec was going to do some research and we'll send it to you, Candace, on co-branded FHA flyers. And every time we do this product, we'll show you what we have co-branded. Candace had asked for that and we'll get that to you. And so if you have a campaign that you want to go out to, particularly FHA potential buyers, anything of this nature, we've got a lot of flyers that we can co-brand that you can put on social media.
Well, that would be great.
Yeah, Kathy, I also put your flyers out at all my open houses. I have your home buyer kit and some of the pertinent flyers.
Has everybody
That's
seen the
helpful.
new home buyer kit?
No, I love it.
So
Can we
this is,
snag some in the office?
we've got as many as you want, and you put your flyers, like Donna said, in here, your cards here. You can put one of our cards. It's very informative packets to give your buyers. This is also on a link So we can actually send you the link on our contacts. You can put it on your contacts. And there's actually a virtual one that you can, give. I would say, put the link on your contact, share your contact and say, hey, there's a first time home buyer kit that has a lot of information in there. But yeah, come get these as many as you want. We've got hundreds and more.
Great.
And get a pen and put a pen in there, get the shelter pens. And use them. That's what they're for.
It's a
Thank
good
you.
way to get contact information, because if you just put one copy out at your open house and they're interested, you get their email address and you can email them a copy. So it's a good way to get accurate information.
Nice.
I love.
Great idea. Thank you.
Kathy, I have a question. Hello?
Yep, go ahead, Abby.
Sorry. Okay, I'm going back just a little bit, like with the financing contingency. If you're on the listing side, what do you need to see something from the buyer's lender stating that they're fully underwritten? Like, how do we know for sure what stage of the underwritten process they are before the financing contingency runs out?
So you're going to get hopefully a pre-approval letter. And that pre-approval letter, you want to read it because a lender can change criteria in it. It should say that they've looked at their credit, they've looked at their income documents, they've looked at their asset documents, and that they've vetted that they've looked at that. There's no concerns. It's always subject to updated documents. It's going to be subject to an appraisal, especially if it's FHA. But you want to read what that letter says. And you as the listing agent, you have the right to call that lender and call them and get them on the phone. If they haven't called you, what we do, and all our listing agents, all our buyers agents, Pam knows this, everybody knows this, Donna knows this, we will call that listing agent and say, hey, we're the lender, we're local appraisers. We've looked at everything they've got. They are awesome buyers. We want you to have our cell number. We engage with that listing agent when you make that offer, hopefully giving it that one more layer of confidence that, hey, we got a local lender. They called, they can tell the seller they physically called me. They've already gotten everything from the buyer. But that's what you want to know, Ebony, as a listing agent. I would call that number one, see if I can get the loan officer on the phone, see if they're local appraisers, see if they're local underwriting, see if they've really gotten everything and looked at it that the letter says.
And if none of that has happened, and I don't mean to change the scope of it, but I want to understand on a lending aspect of it, none of that has happened. And then there was a switch of lenders last minute. Is that now, like, what does that look like on a lending side? Like, if I cannot get in contact, it's an out-of-state lender and I can't get in contact with them at all.
So they switched lenders from the original pre-approval letter.
Yeah. And
they switched to a lender that's out of state.
Yeah.
Yeah, Candace, Pam, Donna.
Are they out of their financing contingency? Because when you switch a lender, sometimes that can make everything take longer. And if they're out of their financing contingency, then there's a little bit of negotiating power in that they can lose their earnest money unless they can get the lender to call you and contact you.
It ended yesterday.
Okay, so then now they should be very concerned that you can't get in touch with the lender, that their earnest money is at risk. And if I were you, I would call the other agent and I would say, listen, I've got to, as part of my due diligence for my clients and making sure this is going to happen for them since they've taken their home off the market, I need to be able to contact that lender and the lender is not responsive. What can you do to help me? We're out of financing contingency. I need for this to happen.
Well, what happens? I don't want it to happen. I'm ready to go with the next one. Like, I'm so okay with the way this is going.
Oh, you want the contract to terminate?
I do. I have someone else.
Pam, at this,
you can't, she can't terminate.
You can't terminate. The terminate comes from the buyer. The seller doesn't have a lot of rights except for earnest money.
Until the contract expires.
Yeah, and until they can't perform. And and you hit closing and they can't perform, that's really the seller's only leverage.
So
Yeah.
this is one suggestion though that I've seen, and Candace, you and Pam, and Donna can relate to it. If you as the listing say, you know what, I really want to go to the next contract. You could incentivize the buyer and say earnest money, half of it or all of it be refunded if you terminate now. I mean, there could be an incentive to get out of that contract if you want to negotiate that with the buyer. Am I correct, Pam? Candace, Donna?
I'm not sure about that, Kathy. I don't know. That's a Melba question.
I've never done that. So I don't know. I
So
mean,
I've seen it. I'm not saying it's legally
Yeah.
right, but I've seen
don't
it where the seller's like, hey, we're willing, if you're willing to terminate now because of the situation you're in, we're willing to refund a portion or all of the earnest money. You might want to ask Melba that question if you have a strong backup offer that you'd like to take
mhm, yeah.
versus waiting till the contract expires.
Oh my gosh. Okay, thank you. This is great.
Well, so we're going to have a chance. We're going to have a chance to talk with Kathy and Alec tomorrow, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. We've gone a couple of minutes over. So if you have any other questions pertaining to FHA today, just send them to me and I'll get them over to Kathy and Alec and they can address those. And we just want to say thank you so much for your time today. We look forward to being
Of
with you all
course.
week. And thank you everybody for being on here. I hope you found this valuable as I did.
It was
Text
very
us or call
valuable.
us. Yeah, text us or call us, y'all. Even if it's not our contract, text us or call us. We're gonna help you.
Superstars.
Thank you.
Have a great
Thank
day.
you. Have a great day. Go make
Thank
some
you.
mess and we'll
Bye, everyone.
up. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ah.